Chapters 63 and 64 of Isaiah are just a continuation one of the other. Not sure why the people that separated the books into verses, not sure why they even separated those two, but it's just one continuous thread throughout. I was thinking this morning, and I asked myself the question: what was Isaiah a patriot? Now, what's a patriot? Well, somebody that has a love for the country and supports their country. Was Isaiah a patriot, you suppose? You think he was a patriot? Probably was. Are we patriots? Pardon me? We got one patriot here. Isaiah talked about, he prophesied about things, he taught, he was with the kings of Judah. I'm sure he preached. I know that from the book. He prophesied about things that would come to pass shortly, and then he prophesied about things that would come to pass century later. And he was, you can just see how he was concerned about his nation, as well as obviously God's kingdom. You just feel, you just kind of feel how he was concerned about his nation. Now, what about us? Those of us who have an appreciation for America, do we worry about what America is going to be like in 2050, 2075? Or do we think about that? Has anyone ever thought about that? Does that concern us? Is there anything we can do about America 2075? So Isaiah was a patriot, I think. And we're going to start today. We were on to this last week, but Lord, we reviewed somewhat last week. We're going to begin with verse 15. And
do you think that his audience got tired of hearing him? Because what he was always, what we read, he was pointing out the wrong on their way. And he was waiting, but I know he was on that corner. They would go another way, the long way around.
Ned's question: you think some people got tired of hearing him? What do you think? Sometimes even good people, Tim, sometimes will think, I've heard that sermon before. I've heard that's the same old stuff. Particularly if it gets on your toes.
It's like at the fair booth, when people are walking down the aisle, they see Church of Christ, and they go to the opposite side.
Yeah.
They'll make eye contact.
Yeah. They don't want to engage in anything that they don't want to, that bothers them. They'd just rather, go on the other side. Yeah. Well, Ned, I think they probably got tired of hearing him. In fact, they probably got tired of hearing him to the point where he was killed. So, beginning in verse 15, this prayer: look down from heaven, and behold from the habitation of thy holiness and of thy glory, where is thy zeal and thy strength, the sounding of thy bowels, and of thy mercies, that is, compassion, mercy, toward me, are they restrained. Now, that's kind of a desperate appeal, right? God, are you there? I mean, it was kind of that intense. Are you there? Where are you, God? Now, look down, and where is thy zeal and thy strength? I wonder why he was asking that question. Where is thy zeal and thy strength? Why do you suppose he was, engaging God in that kind of a conversation? Where is it? I mean, we've heard about your zeal for Israel in the past, but what about now? Doubtless, in verse 16, thou art our father. Though Abraham being ignorant of us, Abraham was long gone, and Israel acknowledges it not. He was long gone, that is, Jacob was long gone. Thou, O Lord, art our Father, and our Redeemer, thy name is for everlasting. Now this idea that thou art our Father, I thought that was kind of a New Testament relationship between man and God. But it must not be confined to the New Testament, right? There was an Old Testament, at least for Isaiah was concerned. He was considering God as the Father. And so what's his appeal there? He's saying, Abraham can't help us. Jacob can't help us. And God, you're our Father. Is he kind of saying, God, you owe it to us? Is that what he's saying? You're our Father. You owe it to us. Is that what he's saying, you think? Now, see, Isaiah was prophesying about things that were going to happen in the future. Now, isn't this amazing? Isn't this amazing that the prophecy would depict what the attitude of those folks would be in the future? Possibly in Babylonian captivity. Do you suppose those people, those Jews in Babylonian captivity, would kind of think those kind of things? If we were taken into slavery and had come from, America, and we were taken into slavery and were beaten, were mistreated, treated like slaves, wouldn't we have that kind of an attitude? God, where are you? I mean,
Would you have an attitude? Should you have that?
you'd what?
Something that I'd done. I wasn't, instead of blaming it on God, then I should have done something. He'll help me out, but I shouldn't blame him for everything.
Well, okay, Barbara says that she wouldn't be blaming God. Have you ever heard anybody say something like this? What have I done to deserve this? Anybody ever heard somebody say that? What have I done? That
Sometimes, when we're confronted by trials and tribulation, sometimes we do question how this could happen,
Yeah.
why it happened, and question God's presence. We all probably do it in project times.
Yeah. So this Isaiah is portraying these people as in the future as saying this, and yes. Don is saying in the case of Job, his friends were assuming what? That he had been engaging in some sort of evil, and this was just the sequential punishment, right? Well, we find that wasn't a true representation of what the situation was.
Even Jesus on the cross questioned why he was forsaken. Or he asked the question, why hast thou forsaken me?
Yeah. Yeah, I've wondered about was Jesus really, did he really have the idea that God had forsaken him? What do you think, Tim? Did he really think that God...
I think, I don't want to steal all your time, but
Well,
that's Psalm 22. Psalm 22 starts out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
okay.
And that's what he says on the cross. And in that psalm, which is called the Psalm of the Cross, by the end of that psalm, the psalmist is saying, I know, God, that you're with me. And so, by all appearances, it looked like he was forsaken. But he comes to the knowledge that even though it may appear that way, I know, God, you are with me.
Yeah. And it was kind of a rhetorical question, maybe. He knew the answer, and the answer was, I'm with you. He's with me. Yeah. You didn't take all my time.
Well, hard. But this problem, I mean, I'm sure you talked about it throughout Isaiah. You talked about him being a patriot. Well, he was, but they didn't see the prophets that way. They saw the prophets as traitors. You're talking about betraying us to the Assyrians or to the Babylonians. Jeremiah, they wanted to get rid of him because of what he preached. If you were really a patriot, you'd preach good things for us,
Yeah.
not prophesy these terrible things. And
Yeah.
so they really didn't like their preaching. And then going back to that question, they really had a hard time seeing that the judgment coming upon them was their fault. It was always somebody else's fault. God didn't understand. It was our forefathers. They'd eaten sour grapes and our teeth are set on edge. So it's never our fault. And the prophets were trying to get them to see, yes, it is. It's your fault. You're the ones that need to change. And this is why this punishment is coming upon you.
Yeah, Isaiah was probably considered a traitor to the nation. Yeah. And he goes on, O Lord, why hast thou made us to err from thy ways? It's kind of like, God, why did you make us do this? We were, on our own, we probably wouldn't have done it, but you've made us to do this, to be evil, and harden our heart from thy fear. Kind of the idea that God hardened their heart, like the last plague of Pharaoh, that God hardened their heart. They probably was thinking in those terms. Return for thy servant's sake the tribes of thine inheritance. Now he's saying, now, it was kind of the attitude, regardless of what, regardless of what our moral condition is, our religious condition is, you kind of owe it to us. You kind of owe it to us. return for thy servant's sake the tribes of thine inheritance. Do you suppose those, the Jewish people had kind of an understanding of how God had favored their nation in the past? Well, sure. I mean, they had the note. They had heard the stories. They had the written word, previously. They had been schooled in the glorious past of the nation, of the people of Israel. Verse 18, the people of thy holiness have possessed it. But a little while our adversaries have trodden down thy sanctuary. Now, probably here this could have reference to when prophecy concerning Babylon, where the people realized that the Jews realized that now their temple was burned, their temple was destroyed, the walls of Jerusalem were gone, and the glorious past, is over. And thinking of it in terms of our just try to get our arms around this. Think in terms of, all the great monuments of Washington, D.C. destroyed, the White House gone, our national heritage gone, and that would be wouldn't that be an awful feeling? It would be to me that our when the Twin Towers caved in, did that get to us? I mean, it got to me. I'm sure it got to everybody. Now let's suppose that instead of the Twin Towers, that it would have been the White House, it would have been the Capitol, it would have been the Pentagon, and of course they were working toward that end. Wouldn't that and suppose that we were subject to slavery, you see. Man, you have to understand, these people, proud of their nation, they're at a low ebb, and obviously, wouldn't they be questioning, God, how did we get here? Yeah, we might think, we know we've been kind of bad people, we've been evil, we've been engaged in bad stuff, but after all, you're our Father. We are your peculiar people. God, you kind of owe it to us. And why aren't you doing something? The people of thy holiness have possessed it, but for a little while. Well, God blessed the nation of Israel for a long time. Our adversaries have trodden down the sanctuary. We are thine. Thou never bearest rule over them. They were not called by thy name. What's he saying there? We are thine, and you never gave the same privilege or bear rule over the other nations around about. But those other nations around about destroyed our Jerusalem, the symbol of our nation, the center of our nation, the very heart of our nation. We are thine, thou never bearest rule over them. They were not called by thy name. It was a wonderful thing that God identified them as a special people, as his own. But they blew it. Then in chapter 64, just a continuation there. Oh, that thou wouldest rend the heavens, or that thou would open the heavens, that thou wouldest come down, that the mountains might flow down at thy presence. What do you suppose he's referencing there?
Moses on the Mount.
Yeah, in the Exodus. in Deuteronomy. That thou would just now think about that for a moment. When Moses went up in the mount, and the mount burned with fire, and the mount quaked, and so forth, do you suppose that the Jews were the only ones that took note of that? Do you suppose that they were the only one that took note of that, let's say, terrible event? Why? How did Rahab over there in Jericho, where'd she get the information that these Jews were God protected? Where'd she get that information? Not by email or telephone or Facebook or whatever, but did that kind of news travel? Do you suppose when the mountain was quaking and smoking and burning, in the case of the Jews, you suppose that might have been visible to people around about? I think that was probably the case. And here he's referencing that idea. Tim, you had your hand up.
Well, I was just going to say that I know in Isaiah's day, when the sun went backwards, that in Hezekiah's day, that was visible to all because people from Babylon came to wish him well and give him thanks.
Yeah. So these miraculous events weren't just, people around about observed those things, were aware of those things. And news traveled, without the modern means of communication, news traveled before we had all these modern electronic conveniences, right? News got around. People talk about unusual things, right? If something's unusual, man, we really spread the word, and it goes from one place to one person to the next person to the next person, so on. So let's read that whole thing again. Oh, that thou wouldest rend, God, just do like you did on the Mount of Sinai, and let the world know that if this is referencing Babylonian captivity, let the world know that you're with us and that we are being extricated from slavery. Just like all the miracles that accompanied the Jews when they first came out of Egypt into the wilderness, and then the miracles, those phenomenal events continued to happen throughout at least the early part of the Jewish nation. And when the melting fire, in verse 2, burneth, and the fire causeth the waters to boil, to make thy name known to thine adversaries. So, they realized that God's name was going to be, other people were going to take note, that the nations may tremble at that presence. When the Jews crossed the River Jordan into the Canaan land, was there some fear among the nations? Is there any record in the Judges and Joshua and the Judges about other nations fearing? Well, yeah. verse 3, when thou didst terrible things. Now that idea of terrible things, when thou didst terrible things which we looked not for, thou camest down, the mountains flowed down at thy presence. That idea of terrible things is included in Deuteronomy 10:21 and Psalms 106:22 and other places. What's that idea of terrible things?
My Bible, that's awesome.
Awesome? Any other words in various translations that you have? Awesome things, terrible. Wonder why King James and some of the other translations used terrible. When I think of terrible, I think of, well, that was really bad. But I guess the word hasn't always meant what I think it means today, you know. Awesome would be probably a better term for our understanding. That he did great, wonderful things. For since the beginning of the world, men have not heard nor perceived by ear, neither hath the eye seen, O God, beside thee, what he hath prepared for him that waiteth for him. Now, in the physical realm, has there been anything as awesome in the physical realm? Has there been anything as awesome? Has God done anything as awesome as with the Jewish people? Yeah, okay, but and all of those things were awesome, right? Has God operated in the physical realm? Has God operated to the same extent, worldwide as he did to the Jews?
Yes, but the things that he does, I'm sorry, thank you. The things that he does, he's done on an everyday basis now. Just like sustaining life, sustaining the solar system, the sun, and everything in its order. He does that on an ongoing basis. We're so used to it that we become basically numb to it. We overlook it.
Well, I say that the operation of the universe is just kind of natural, right?
No,
Huh?
it is to us now because we see it all the time, yes.
Well, it's natural. It's ongoing. But has God interrupted think of how many times God has interrupted nature on behalf of the Jews. Part of the Red Sea, that's interruption of nature, right? Water just doesn't stand up, as a wall. The Jordan River was parted, stopped until they got across. The walls of Jericho fell down. What else? I mean, just on and on and on. Have those kind of phenomenon, has God in other realms operated that way? In the material realm? I don't think so. You see, these things were pretty unique to the Jews. And they were proud of that. God had done all these miracles on behalf of his people, but then did they appreciate it? I mean, that's a big question. Did they appreciate it? They expected they expected down along the timeline of history, they expected God to take care of them, even if it meant demonstrating with these awesome, unnatural kind of phenomenon. When thou didst terrible things which we looked for, not for, thou camest down, the mountains flowed down at thy presence. For from the beginning of the world men have not heard, nor perceived by the ear, neither hath the eye seen, O God, beside thee, which he hath prepared for him that waiteth for him. Thou meetest him that rejoiceth and worketh righteousness, those that remember thee in thy ways. Behold, thou art wroth, for we have sinned, and we have sinned. In those is continuance, and we shall be saved. Now, he's kind of changing his tone there, recognizing that sin got in the way of God's care for them, God's fatherhood of them. And he says, well, now we are as unclean, we are as an unclean thing, and all our righteousness are as filthy rags. And we all do fade as a leaf, and our iniquities, like the wind, have taken us away. Now, Isaiah's kind of getting real here now, isn't he? He's saying, yeah, even our most righteous behavior is as what? Filthy rags. That's a pretty good, filthy rag gives you kind of, you got an image, that gives you an image of what he's talking about here. We all do fade as a leaf, and our iniquities, like the wind, have taken us away. And there's none that calleth upon thy name. When he says, and there's none that calleth on thy name, do you suppose there were any people, in addition to Isaiah, that called upon the name of God, that were righteous? Well, I would think so. When the great prophet of northern Israel thought he was the only one that was in covenant with God, what did God tell him? Well, there's 7,000 that haven't bowed the knee to Baal. Okay? Well, so this is kind of like, somebody might say, well, our nation is just rotten. Well, is that true? A lot of people are doing rotten things, but there are a lot of people that are doing good things, and there are a lot of people that are righteous, and there are a lot of people that are in covenant with God. But that's kind of an expression that's commonly used, that, everything's bad, everything's... And there was none that calleth upon thy name, and that stirreth up himself to take hold of thee, for thou hast hid thy face from us, and hast consumed us because of our iniquities. So this is now we're acknowledging, right? Now we're acknowledging that we are in the situation that we're in because of our iniquities. And now, O Lord, thou art our Father, and we are the clay, and thou art potter, and we all are the work of thy hand. Now, this potter and the clay is a metaphor that's used throughout the Scripture. And, you know, one might think, well, if God is the potter and we are the clay, then God made us what we are, and we are not responsible or accountable. Could you see how that reasoning would work? God's the potter, humankind's the clay, God made us this way. Not anything we can do about that. What's wrong with that logic? Is there anything wrong with that logic?
He gave us free will.
Pardon me?
He gave us free will, and there are some that choose to be righteous, and there are a lot that choose not to be righteous.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
If it's a pliable, new, fresh clay, if our hearts are pliable and fresh and new, as opposed to old and dried out and set in our ways, there's a difference. It's the same clay.
Have any of you done any pottery work, work with let's suppose, what?
It's not pretty.
Well, I'm talking about somebody's professional at it. If the clay has straw in it, if the clay has impurities in it, if it's got hard, can you do anything? You got to have good clay, right? Is that right, Tim? Got to have some good clay there. I call on Tim because he kind of can read audiences and kind of see who's listening and see who's being affected, right? Well, he's not going to admit that. Well, so there's that metaphor of the potter and the clay. The clay is important. There's only so much you can do with clay that's not good. But it's kind of like, okay, God, thou art our Father. We are the clay, and thou art the potter, and we all are the work of thy hands. Now, I don't know what was in his mind there when he used that metaphor, but it could have been that he was kind of saying, well, you have some responsibility here, God, for how we turned out. Verse 9, but be not wroth very sore, O Lord, neither remember iniquity forever. Behold, see, we beseech thee, we are all thy people. Now, is that true? We are all thy people. Huh? In a sense, in a human, in a material sense, right? We are all his people. But who are God's people? Were there some in that Jewish community that were God's people? Yeah. Were there some that were not? Yeah. Be not wroth very sore, O Lord, neither remember iniquity forever. Behold, see, we beseech thee, we're all thy people. Well, only in a sense were they all his people, but only the spiritual were his people. Thy holy cities are wilderness. Now, here's no doubt the prophecy here relates to the Babylonian captivity, because thy holy cities are a wilderness. Zion is a wilderness. Jerusalem is a desolation. Wonder why he uses thy holy cities. thy holy cities. Jerusalem was supposed to be the holy city. What about, how come he's talking about holy cities? We use the expression the Holy Lands, right? What do we mean? I don't necessarily subscribe to that idea that they're the Holy Lands, but I know what they're talking about. When we think of the Holy Land, do we think of just Jerusalem? Yeah, we think of that area of the world. So not only Jerusalem, but areas beyond Jerusalem. Our holy and our beautiful house. What's that? Our holy and our beautiful house. Well, temple. There in the minds of those people in captivity, our holy and our beautiful house, our temple, where our fathers praised thee. It is burned up with fire, and all our pleasant things are laid waste. So, then he asked a question, maybe it's rhetorical. Wilt thou refrain thyself for these things? O Lord, wilt thou hold thy peace and afflict us very sore? In a sense, the question is this kind of final? Are you going to do anything to help us? Or are we done? Are we toast?